Okay, composition 3. Let's continue. Provided my microphone is working and the volume is okay. This week was chaotic, to say the least. You probably forgot a little bit about us because you were in the middle of midterms and everything. And I did say not to worry about any homework this week. So hopefully things are going well for you and we can get back to focusing on what we need to do. There was no midterm in our class. I'm sure you appreciated that. So whether you were being patient for this lecture or you were busy with other things, I appreciate the fact that you're giving me the benefit of the doubt here. I know you handed in your papers and you're probably anxious to know your grades. This weekend, I'm going through grades for all of my classes, including yours. So you can expect to get an email soon with a grade and some comments about what to improve, what the good and bad is related to your writing. I discussed already, some people wrote a little bit too much. That's not the end of the world, but when it comes to deciding whether you get an A plus or not, that might become a factor. Certainly, too much is better than too little. Today, we're going to just continue through the textbook. There's not going to be a new writing assignment, but I am going to give you some more homework. I would like to say it's much, much preferable for you to type it on your computer rather than write in the textbook. Normally, I would actually prefer you to write in the textbook because I would just walk around the classroom and have a look at what you wrote. But if you're sending me a file, it's actually easier for me just to open a small file that just has the answers and then glance at the questions from my own textbook and check if you've done the answers well, rather than looking at, 3 or 4 pictures that you've taken of your textbook. And because of lighting and quality and other factors, the size of the file and everything else, it's just a lot more awkward. So if you don't mind, please just write your answers in a Word file and then attach it to your email, and then I'll be able to check it easier. Okay? Now, we're on page 28. Remember, I am going to draw your attention to certain questions in the textbook that are kind of the same format as what I like to do on the exam. So watch out for those because one's coming up here. First today, we're continuing talking about descriptive adjectives, and then we're going to get into something we call connectors. I usually call them transition words, but in the textbook they like to call them connectors. So first, let's just finish off the descriptive part. What it says on page 28 is a description of somebody's grandmother. And I'm not going to read this over because I read the Niagara Falls one last time. And there is another one about location just before that I skipped. But I want to emphasize the fact that in the second example on page 26, the second one about the cafe, what they're doing there is emphasizing prepositions, which enables the person to imagine where something is. Now, I would say this is a little bit more important in creative writing than it is when you're making an argument. However, I guess in certain situations, prepositions are essential to understanding what actually happened. For a good example of this would be a police report. When you're describing a crime scene, you need to know exactly where things were. And if something, an object was behind, beside, in front, above, below, in or out, side of something, that is critical to understanding what happened in reconstructing a scene. And so if it was happening, if you were describing something for a court, or, sometimes these descriptions are very, very important. Of course, we have CCTV and video a lot of the time now because we put those cameras everywhere and people have smartphones and stuff. But nonetheless, for the purpose of creative writing, obviously, you're trying to get the person to imagine a scene, and they're reconstructing the same thing that you're describing in their mind. But for the purposes of justice, or for reconstructing to try to understand how something happened, there's not always a video there to watch. So it needs to be described with words. So that's very important. On page 28, where we are now, the person is using adjectives to describe her grandmother. So she's going to be using things that describe qualities and characteristics of the person. And so we have a lot of these words in English, and most languages do. But English tends to have layers of adjectives to describe people's behavior. So there's a lot of choice there. So you can really be specific in your selection of, how you want to describe yourself in an interview, for example, when you're applying and they say, describe your best characteristic. Or when you're trying to talk about somebody else, maybe you're doing it because you're trying to emphasize somebody's good qualities because you're setting somebody up for a date. I don't know. Or maybe you're writing a book about somebody, or you're describing a politician and you're endorsing them. Whatever the case may be, the use of these words is very important. We're going to use them for arguments, but like I said, if you can write a good essay and you can construct good sentences that are effective and logical, I would say, you can do any type of writing. It's really a building block that can fuel your ability in any other area, whether you're a journalist or a lawyer or a novelist, or you're a screenwriter. The skills that you learn in order to write an effective essay can be applied all over the place, across the board. So here's the description of the grandmother. When I was young, I admired my grandmother for her strength and kindness. She was not very big. In fact, she was tiny and very thin. She was strong, though. She lived by herself and still did a lot of the chores around her house. When I was a child, I saw her almost every day, and she and I would talk about everything. Excuse me. She was a very happy person and was always smiling and joking. She often made me laugh. My grandmother was also very patient, and she would listen to all my problems. She gave me very good advice whenever I needed it. I didn't need to be afraid to tell her anything because she never got mad at me. She just listened and tried to help. I also liked to spend time with her because she had interesting stories to tell about her own childhood and life experiences. When I was young, my grandmother was my favorite friend. All right, so that's a very nice description, obviously. Notice it's more of an explanation than an example. That she talks about them in very general terms. There isn't actually, when she says she will listen to all my problems, the writer doesn't give an example of a problem she listened to. Okay? So, as I pointed out to you, when we go through these paragraphs, you're going to notice certain things. What could we do to make this paragraph longer, both longer and more effective? Wherever she was talking about a general description of her grandmother, she might choose to support that by a particular event that supported that opinion, that argument, right? Because we basically here have to take her word for it, because she's not actually got any proof. It's just a general description of her mother's qualities, okay? So this is one of the things that you have to go beyond that when you're writing your paper for me. If I ask you to describe a person in your family or a person that you admire, you can't just say all of these good qualities about them without giving me some evidence of things that they actually did or things that they said, right? You have to link your statements to actual facts, right? It's just like when a president, not naming any names, says that they're fantastic and they did all these things, but where's all the evidence of the things that they did? If there isn't any, then it's called lying. So you can say all the things you want. And the same thing goes for writing. If you make all these claims and you just describe generally, you describe it well, but generally, you don't really have any substance there for anybody who's an intelligent reader to hang on to. So if if you say there's money, show me the money. Maybe that's a bad analogy, and that's a quote from a movie from before some of you were born, so it's probably a bad choice. But anyway, that's what you got to do. Don't just believe that every academic reader is supposed to be a skeptic. They're supposed to be critical, so you have to prove everything you say. Nonetheless, description is very important, and it is very persuasive. It's one of those things that can add to your persuasive strategy and to increase the persuasive effect of your writing. So I am saying it's important, but just don't forget that the logic and support is still more important than good description. That was often my problem, is that when I handed in papers and I ended up with a B, sometimes my teacher in high school would say, "Jeremy, you have a lovely writing style, and you have your diction is very well developed, your vocabulary is very deep, but you're really not making an argument, you're just telling a story." And I had to work on that. So I had the language skills, but I didn't have the strategy for building a good argument. So some of you might be in the same boat as I was. One of the exercises on the exam will be, I'm going to show you a picture like the one below. So number 7, you have to write 8 sentences and describe one of these people. So choose one of these pictures, either the guy with his hand on his forehead, right? I'm already doing description, so I don't want to do this for you, but I'm just generally saying, talk about what it looks like, right? Just the physical things that are happening in the picture, the expressions on the person's face, the angles, the front, the back, the bottom, the top, the objects, and then interpret it as well. Link the things that you see to your observations, right? So the hand on the forehead, what does that mean? Or choose the lady who's on the phone, one of those ancient phones, that ancient technology we had where there was a cord on the phone and there was buttons and it plugged into the wall. Do those still exist? I don't know. Anyway, this is the way we used to make phone calls. I didn't get a smartphone until like 10 years ago. And when I was in university, I got my first cell phone when I was like 22. So this is the phone I saw when I was growing up. So I think this picture might be a bit old, but some people do have these phones still on their desk. She's got it up to her ear and she's got an expression on her face, and there's a background and there's a foreground. 8 sentences, description, analysis, description, analysis. Make sure you're very descriptive because that's the main point. And then there should be several sentences that sort of interpret what is happening in the picture. Okay, that's for homework. Number 7, page 28. Now, the next page says describe a process. This is something that I'm not going to make you do as an assignment, but it's just something in life that is very common. Whenever you try to build something or do something, if you're making a YouTube video and you're showing somebody how you can do something, you go through steps and you explain how you do them, and that is called a process, right? And let's be honest, YouTube especially, just showing how to do a process and describing it. There might be writing on the bottom, there might be subtitles, you might be saying it, but people make millions and millions and millions of dollars describing processes. People are obsessed with how-to videos on YouTube. I even have a bunch of videos that I'm thinking of uploading related to gardening, and basically it's me talking about how to plant and how to grow something and look at this and look at that, and there's steps that you follow and they have a certain order, and if you do them out of order, for gardening for example, nothing grows, right? If you do it at the wrong time in the wrong order, there's a specific timing and a specific order you have to follow. If you order something off of Coupang and it comes to your door and you take out all the pieces and you're supposed to assemble it, if you try doing it backwards from the last instruction to the first, you're not going to get anywhere. And this is what a process is. So again, I won't describe this one because this would be another homework assignment, another page to do for your homework. You got to read about the process of evaporation, which is when a liquid changes into a vapor. The most common example of it is water. So when liquid turns into a vapor, you describe it. And you have to list the steps, underline the topic sentence and the concluding sentence, and then list the steps that you need to do in order to complete this experiment demonstrating evaporation. Okay, this brings us to one of the main points of today's lecture, what we call connectors or transitions. So I am going to link a handy, you can find it yourself, but I'm just going to link a page that I found where somebody has made a table. I'll link it from my website and you can visit their website. And it's just a handy table that puts connectors into different categories. There are so many of them. There are dozens, there's 100 different choices, but they actually need to be applied in certain situations. That's why one of my students, I think it wasn't in Composition 3, but Composition 2, but it applies to you as well. There's a tendency for students just to say first, second, third, fourth, last, and in conclusion. The student asked, is it okay to do that? Yes, it is, but that's very basic, and it doesn't really, it's not as effective because unless it's in order. Like if you're saying this happened in the order of time, chronologically, first, second, third, fourth, last, okay, that makes more sense because those are actual steps. So if you were doing a process paragraph and there were 5 steps, then I would say, yes, I agree, that's a good choice of a connector. But if you're not, if you're stringing together an argument and you're putting together ideas and they're not related by order, then first putting them with ordinal numbers as transitions doesn't really help. It doesn't help you understand the relationship between paragraphs or between points. So no, if you want to develop your writing style and you want to be a more effective writer, you shouldn't do that. That's how you learn when you're doing it. A basic structure is just to keep the order. But now at this point, you're in university, you should be looking for what is the relationship between the ideas. Is it addition? Is it this and this? 1 plus 1 kind of thing, and then another plus, or is it this except this, right? Or is it a choice, right? You can this one or this one. These words communicate this idea that you're showing how these ideas are related. So you should choose connecting words and transitions appropriately that are based on the relationship between the ideas. Okay, so the first examples of the connectors there are first, second, third, etc. You also have the choice of saying if it's just an order, but you're not counting the steps, then you can say next or then, like as they do in recipes often. When you're following the instructions for a recipe, they just don't say first, second, they start saying next. So you're done that, now you're doing another thing. So now, or then, or next, or before this point, okay? Those are all kind of orders in time. All of these ones here are describing relationships by time, except when you get to while, and that means that's still time, but it's meaning you're doing, both things are happening at the same time. And when means once another thing starts happening, you can then do this other thing. So you're setting conditions basically when you're saying when. Until, and also another condition, and as. These are kind of all relationships of timing. That's why they're showing this, because these words are very useful for describing processes. Okay? But I'm going to put up a link, like I said, which has more categories than just relationships of order or time. Okay, so you can Choose the appropriate connectors to connect the steps in number 10. And on 11, you have to put the pieces of the paragraph in the correct order. So this is all about relationship of ideas by order. So this is this week's instructions for homework. It's due next Friday, as usual. And by next Friday, you should have, I should be able to post a grade sheet, a class list with all your completed assignments and grade sheets. We should be completely up to date by next Friday, and then we can get into the next step of working towards the essay. But I'll give you one more week. Just this homework's not that complicated. It shouldn't take that long, and you can finish up your midterms. So once again, I'll post this on the website, but I would like you to do page 7, choose one of the pictures and write 8 sentences to describe it. Do number 9 on page 29. List the steps for completing the experiment. Do A, B, and C there and answer those questions, 9, A, B, and C. Do number 10, which is fill in the connectors. And number 11, which is put the chunks of the paragraph into the correct order. You do not have to do number 12. You do not have to write a process paragraph. Okay? So that is, once again, 7, not number 8, 7, 9, 10, 11. That is your homework for next week. Due next Friday. And like I said, everything should be caught up by then, and we can discuss doing an essay outline and moving forward towards our goal of writing a paper. Thank you for listening, and have a good weekend.